is the year 1944.
And land them safely on the enemy shore.
The free men of the world are marching together to victory.
As the build-up continued at a furious pace, there was one great problem that had to be overcome successfully. That of getting the men and machines ashore safely, quickly and effectively. The paratroopers had their own way to drop into enemy territory and, being lightly armed, fight ferociously to take and hold the ground. But what are the heavier units of the army? The infantry, tanks, equipment, artillery and vehicles? How to get them across over 200 miles of sea and land them safely on the enemy shore? One part of the answer was landing craft. Special boats that could deliver men and machinery of war onto the hostile beach. The smallest craft of these was the landing craft vehicle or personnel. It was a Higgins boat, built out of cross-layered plywood. With the shallow draft, she could carry 36 fully armed men right up onto the beach, and even small vehicles such as jeeps. These became one of the most useful vessels of the war. Most of the ones you see nowadays are in very, very rough condition. But luckily I know a man who's got one, and with his team he's working furiously to get it ready for a military show at Gosport around June the 6th. The landing craft, humble as it may seem, actually did help win the war.
One of the unsung heroes of World War II, I guess.
Like many people, James has a passion for keeping the past alive. I have my 1944 Jeep, but that is a very small project compared to what other people get up to. It's one thing to drop a new engine into a wartime Jeep, but it's a hell of a lot more to do with a 70-year-old boat that has to be safe, seaworthy and operational in just a few weeks' time for one of the D-Day shows. I think James has got his work cut out.
I'm quite excited about the opportunity. In front of the world's media, you have to make sure that everyone's safe. And the last thing I want on my conscience is anything to ever happen to anyone on my watch. There's very few of them left in preservation, to be truthful. And the majority of the ones you see out and about are the post-war fiberglass ones, which is what we've got here. It was last in the water about 10 years ago. And before that it was used in various films, and it was in Saving Private Ryan. Monuments Men, make it look a bit more official for George Clooney. We put in the wooden ribs in, so we're on a great mad panic now to try and get it all sorted. We've got a fantastic group of guys that come in, going to be here a bit later and cracking on and trying to get it back together.
I asked him how he handles his interest in this subject.
Big black hole that you pour money into. My wife used the word obsessive, or an obsession, as opposed to a hobby, so I think she's probably quite accurate.
And what do these things represent to him now?
As the veterans disappear, these are the only tangible things that are left, just to remind people of sort of the sacrifices made in war, and also the terrible waste of war. As you sit in this boat, you sort of have an appreciation being in it, and you can just think about what those poor chaps went through. If you're going in, you'd be down on one knee.
The not knowing of what's going to happen when that ramp goes down and you've got to get out. Charge off of this into God knows what.
Like I said, the armour plate stops there, but anything above you, you're very vulnerable. And obviously if you're going in and there's a cliff face and they're looking down on you, it's even worse. As soon as the door drops, you're very, very vulnerable.
There were other variations too of landing craft, but the largest and most versatile was the LST, or Landing Ship Tank. The LSTs used for D-Day and many other operations had been hurriedly built in the USA and performed extremely well in North Africa and Italy. They were one of the main solutions to the problem of delivering the invasion force. LST-325 is now restored to her former glory in Indiana as a floating museum. Like many of her type, she was used extensively for boarding and disembarking practice along the Devon and Cornwall southern coast before setting off for Normandy. There were many reasons for choosing the southwest of England as the assembly point for the invasion troops. It was remote, sparsely populated, and offered many deep water estuaries, harbours, rivers and woodland in which to hide and assemble a vast number of troops, machines and other landing vessels prior to the invasion. The whole area was cordoned off. There was no access to this apart from military personnel and those authorised by the highest levels. Secrecy in this operation was of the essence. The coastline and estuaries in this area were an ideal hiding ground for all sorts of craft, and it was in range of the Normandy beaches. Day by day, hour by hour, the invasion was coming. On the way back home, we had a call from another James, owner of the landing craft. Would we like to film them at the show, just down the road in Portsmouth? How could we refuse? And in our Herculean efforts to get this very disparate group of people filmed, we've just hit 2,000 miles over the last week. When we got there, the crew was still getting the craft ready and painted. Last time I saw James, he was up in Bristol with this, slightly nervous about putting it in the water and even more nervous about it floating. The engine works fine, they just haven't put the boat, engine and water together. This is one of the few remaining serviceable landing craft of this type in the world.
I'll just get a bigger rammer.
This was a star in Private Ryan. The main scene, that's that boat.
Tuesday evening, 2:30.
Just to add to the situation,
We'll get the 3.7 gun out yet.
Then we'll go and sort this gun out. We're just going to take the gun from the to the event.
James's team, the Dig for Victory boys, had also brought their gun and were towing it with the slow-moving AEC Matador. With a top speed of around 20 miles an hour, it was a traffic nightmare. When James had finally managed to release the handbrake,
It's a newness.
we set off to the showground. Driving an 80-year-old vehicle with no power steering, no power brakes, a non-synchro gearbox requires a lot of skill, especially with a big gun on the back, and in today's traffic. That's 15 miles an hour. These trucks were well known for not going fast and stopping even slower. The plan was to set up the gun and other exhibits overnight on this historic piece of ground and do a beach landing with the boat the next day. This watertight area near Portsmouth was one of the main British, Canadian and American embarkation points. The soldiers and vehicles assembled here were driven straight into the mouths of the LST. They went straight across to Normandy. Team Shopland brought their gun into position, elevated it to the correct position, and let the crowd know what the sound of just one of these guns was like. 75 years ago, there were hundreds of these in the area to protect the invasion fleet. With her paintwork still wet, and everything on board untried or tested, the landing craft rendezvoused with restored gunboats and launches from this era, and made her way from the historic Portsmouth harbour to the embarkation beach, where an expectant crowd was gathering. Despite it being the first time, James and crew confidently steered into the shore, dropped the ramp and landed a couple of Tommies on the beach. It was an emotional moment. I was signalled aboard, up the ramp and into one of the most iconic images of the D-Day period. Everyone in the team had practiced their roles on dry land, and we did have some expert Royal Navy help on board, but this was the first time at sea. After a while our coxswain got used to her. The team swung into action and we patrolled up and down the shore.
We're pretty chuffed that we managed to get out here, get it on the water. I mean, truthful, it's the guys around you, the guys you see here on the boat, they've worked their socks off to make this happen. I've just got in the way really. Courtesy of American Express, MasterCard and Visa, there's a boat here today. Don't tell my wife that, by the way.
It was a warm, sunny day in calm seas, and no one was shooting or shelling us. How different it would have been 75 years ago. So far, charting our course of the 75th anniversary of D-Day, tanks, guns, men and trucks have provided the land-based historical references. James and his landing craft the seaborne elements. But what about the airborne aspects? Right on cue, we were treated to an aerial reminder of a rendezvous we have to keep in France with some exceptional guys we had met earlier in Florida. They were going to extraordinary lengths to recreate something very special.